They don't need to know this. Okay, so how would you deal with that? Would you deal with them differently? Would you know how to talk to them since they live in villages? But not like the Hopi do. I mean, Hopi literally live on top of each other. But it's village. I mean, they live in individual houses. So, you know, this family lives here, and this family lives next door, and there's that much space between the two houses. Okay. I was just curious how you guys would deal with that. So the one thing you need to know is who these people are and where they come from, right? Okay. And then maybe when you find out where they come from, maybe you need to look it up and try to figure out who they are. And then take everything that you learn from looking all this stuff up and take it with a grain of salt. Because if you read about what's going on with the Navajo, a lot of the information is crap, right? A lot of it is somebody that was here for 2 weeks and then he decided to write a paper because now he gets a PhD from this paper. Exactly. Or he gets advanced in rank because he just published a paper about you guys. And most of it's fairly erroneous. So, but it's a good idea to at least look. I was talking to one of my colleagues here at this institution. He's a Belagana, and his fiance is Chinese. Okay, which makes her a Belagana too, doesn't it? What's she?
Chinese American.
I don't think you guys have all that. You don't have. That's not. What's Chinese in Navajo?
Oh, it's not so.
Would you call her Belagana, or would you call her?
Nada.
That's what you call her? What the hell do you call me?
Noah.
He's making the sign of an asshole. Thanks, Francis. So what would you call her? I mean, she's Chinese and he's not Chinese. He's Rama. I don't know. So the idea, and the reason I'm asking you these questions is because that's what we're going to be dealing with. We're going to be dealing with our interpretation of what these people are seeing or what these people are doing. A good example is we're talking about social anxiety disorder, which is very prevalent in the United States. 17% of the people in the United States claim that they have social anxiety disorder. Some of it's so severe they can't go outside. Not agoraphobia, but some of these individuals, you know, they have to talk, and when they get in front of a, they always sounds like they're about to cry. You've heard them do this, haven't you? Okay, and you feel so sorry for them because you kind of feel the same way when you get in front of people. But it's not really that important to us. This is very common in the United States, but we don't care. However, in China, they do. In East Asia, they do. This is very important because people are so close together. We're all spread apart. So it really doesn't matter as far as we're concerned. But the Japanese are right next to each other. The Chinese have like 1.8 billion people in their country. 1.8 billion. If you realize how crowded that is, you guys don't even have a concept of crowded. Go to Phoenix sometime and just walk around Phoenix and watch people not look at you. Right? Isn't that what happens? They never make eye contact. I was in the airport. My God. You would have thought that I was a leper or something. Nobody would. I thought I was invisible. People kept walking right in front of me. I'm walking this way, they're walking this way, and they're walking right in front of me. And they expect me to get out of the way. Either that or I'm a ghost. I didn't figure it out. I wasn't sure if I was alive or dead. And it kept happening over and over and over again.
Did you bump anybody?
I didn't. I especially stepped out of the way of women and small children. They don't bother me that much. But it's the guys that just assume that I'm going to get out of their way. I'm not that violent that I get with this one. So the point is, I guess the point is that it's not the same as it is here. And if you have a client that's from Chicago or from, I don't know, Denver, they want us to go to Denver for Christmas. They want us to do all of our Christmas shopping up in Denver. I heard that on the news last night. Or maybe it was an advertisement, I don't know. They'll let us have a room up in Denver for $99 a night so that we can do all of our Christmas shopping up in Denver. How far is Denver?
6 hours.
6 hours?
Yeah, 7.
That's not too bad.
8 hours.
Oh, you drive slow.
Yeah, you probably drive slow.
What the hell's wrong with you?
Slow driver.
I like to eat.
You know, there may be free meals, but I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, they want you to go to downtown Denver. There's a walking area in downtown Denver where you can do all your shopping. Anyway, so go down there sometime and watch people not look at you. Or maybe they will look at you. Since I look like them, maybe
Probably.
I'm not worth looking at or something. Or maybe because I'm old. Maybe it has to do with my age. Or the fact that I'm only 5'6". That could have something to do with it. I can do 100 push-ups. Okay? I'm not the guy you want to mess with. But they didn't do that with my son. My son's got shoulders like this. I mean, he's like twice as wide as I am. But they didn't get it his way. He looks like a wrestler or something. Professional wrestler. Social anxiety disorder is a fear of acting in an inept and unacceptable manner, leading to negative social consequences. Research has shown that East Asians exhibit more social anxiety symptoms than European Americans do, so they have more symptoms. So does that mean that we diagnose more people with social anxiety in East Asia? And the answer is no. Accordingly, evidence suggests that interdependence is associated with heightened social anxiety. Obviously, we have hikikomori, which we don't have in the United States. I'm going to show you another social anxiety disorder that is only East Asian, doesn't exist in the United States. However, social anxiety is less documented in East Asian countries. This is something very odd. So despite the fact that they have more of it, they diagnose it less frequently. Now this is a really serious problem. They've got a problem that they're not acknowledging. It's easy for me, I'm not East Asian, it's not an insult to me, but it's easy for me to do that. So here's a question for you. Is there a problem here on the reservation that is relatively serious, but people pretend it doesn't exist? Let me give you an example from up north. They're Catholic up north. And Catholics, you can't commit suicide or you can't be buried in hallowed ground. You can't be buried in a Catholic cemetery. So they don't commit suicide, but suicide's a really serious problem. So they pretend it doesn't exist, but it does. And it's much higher than it is in the white population. Yet they don't talk about it, because if they talk about it, then they can't be buried in a Catholic cemetery. That's the problem up north. And that's why I got fired, because I wrote a paper about resilience. I was trying to show that they are resilient people. That all we need to do is talk about the resilience and show them how strong they are, and they'll be less likely to commit suicide. They didn't mind the resilience part. It was the part about the suicide they didn't like. So they wouldn't let me do research on the reservation. So I did research off the reservation. And I lost my job. I lost my job because I used the word suicide, which they didn't like. So the question is there a problem here that will get me fired if I mention that word? No, they're not going to fire you guys. You live here. You belong here, except for Francis and Cody. Francis in his clothes. And his blue shirt. And Travis in his red coat. I don't understand. Okay. Okay, so is there a problem here that we're ignoring, that exists, but we don't want to talk about because it's taboo? I think it would be wonderful if you guys didn't have any problems at all,
Yeah, it would be.
and you didn't hide anything under the carpet. I mean, that
Probably the same thing.
suicide, is that a possibility? So you guys have,
Maybe.
okay, you know what I'm thinking of.
What?
Well, but he can't say it.
Come on, say it.
He can't. It's a word he can't use, just like ejaculate the other day. He couldn't say the word ejaculate. And that's okay. I mean, it's taboo. You're not supposed to use that word. So are there other problems that we're just pretending don't exist? And they do exist. East Asians, it has to do with social anxiety disorder. They pretend it doesn't exist.
There's two examples I think you can probably. One is like right in front of us. You can see them. You can see like the public, public drunkenness,
Okay.
alcohol, drugs, and I think the second one that doesn't. People kind of hide and don't talk about are kind of like sexual assaults,
Sexual assault.
molestations, those type of stuff. So,
Okay.
suicide probably would fall. It's kind of like in the back, but it's just talked about, but it's not really kind of put out yet. But I think there's a start to it, like the preventions, and then there's counselors. There's before a couple of years, there's probably one of these preventions and counselors. It's probably totally different, I would say. Now they have like part of, I know they have like mental health in some areas, but short of staff. That's as far as I can dig up right there.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Do we have anything else?
I think it's hidden in regards to, you talk about taboos.
Right.
A lot of the elders and a lot of the people in the community say, this is what I heard a few times. You don't talk about those kind of things in the public area around students, young individuals.
Right.
You don't explain what takes place. You don't talk about the situation, which is suicide, because you invite it into your life.
I see.
If you were to mention it, so
Okay.
you kind of open the door for that evil spirit to come into your life. So the more you talk about it, the more you're going to think about it, the more you're going to become depressed, and then all of a sudden, then you're going to be in that same boat, that same situation. So they kind of hide it. So in a lot of these programs, like he's talking about, within the past 2 years, I think it started increasing. We had a lot of people going out into the community, but then again, it kind of slowed down.
Because
Just
somebody
recently,
complained about it.
Because somebody complained about it.
Probably that somebody that complained was an elder.
So the Navajo Nation had this one program that started, and they initiated this past year. And they were going out to the different communities because the high rate of suicide. But within the past 3 months, that program just died out.
Just died. I know this is a tragedy, because of course they're not going to be dealing with it. If they don't deal with it, it increases. If it increases, of course, we have more young people dying of suicide.
And then the people that know how to deal with it don't want to talk about it. And that's the thing. We have elders, like medicine people,
Sure.
that can treat the problem, but they're not willing to share, and then they're not willing to put it on a book to where you can maybe even just read it and heal yourself or learn the process. So they say that apprentice, 20 years apprentice, 30 years are the only ones that can perform those ceremonies, and not everybody can perform those ceremonies.
I got news for you. Pretty soon those people are going to die, and you got nobody that could do it.
That's been happening for so many years, so a lot of our ceremonies are becoming extinct to where we could treat these problems, and a lot of these ceremonies are becoming extinct.
Because I saw that up north. Nobody knew how to open a bundle. They had a pipe. They had a holy pipe that was supposed to keep a group well. It was supposed to keep them together. And nobody learned the ceremonies. They can't open the pipe. They can't use it. So it's no longer protecting the tribe, as strange as that may seem. And you can believe it or not believe it. I guess it doesn't really make any difference. But the problem is that we've got people that refuse to talk about it. And that's the biggest problem that we've got.
So how did they deal with an issue like that, like off the reservation?
The reason they were off the reservation is so that they could deal with this problem. They left the reservation so they wouldn't have to deal with that's not the right word. They wouldn't have to deal with the traditional people that were more traditional.
So they will find people that were able to help them and talk about it?
Right. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why they're off the reservation. The other reason is because there's no work on the reservation. There were a lot of different reasons if they left, but one of them was so that they could deal with something that they weren't allowed to deal with on the reservation. You know, if you're dealing with everybody's Catholic on the reservation and you want to become, you know, go into another church, what do? You stay on the reservation or do you leave? Well, you leave, of course, because you can't get the spiritual teaching that you want on the reservation. So you have to leave. And that's what they did. Some of them had kids that committed suicide. They weren't allowed to talk about it, and they weren't dealing with it, so they just left. And they went to the town right next to the reservation to live in that town so that they could make sure that their other kids didn't commit suicide. The problem with suicide is that when it happens, and it happens in your family, it becomes an acceptable norm. It becomes a norm, is the problem. So that was the biggest problem that they had. It became acceptable. So if you have suicide in your family, then it becomes an acceptable option. If there's no suicide in your family, it's not acceptable. I mean, killing yourself doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's an illogical thing to do. But if it happens in your family, it's not like you can say Uncle Charlie was wrong, or he was a bad man. You can't say that. So it becomes an acceptable option. And that's the problem. It tends to, it's just like child abuse or sexual abuse. It just tends to perpetuate itself. And suicide does the same thing.
So if you go off the reservation, you go, there's Christianity, different religions. Some of them don't accept it.
Catholicism doesn't.
And then we deal with that.
Yeah.
And then also therapy. Western therapy can only do so much.
Sure.
It's kind of the same. Traditional therapy can
Right.
only do so much.
Right.
So even if you leave, then out there you're dealing with the same issues, and then there's even, you know, worse factors to where, you know, people are going into churches and shooting people and shooting themselves.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with, even if you leave the reservation, it's kind of like the same situation out there. So if we were to get over the hump, what are some things that we can do as a younger generation with our elders? Because it worked for us in the past. It's effective. Now, how can we get over the hump to where we can educate the younger children,
Correct.
and to help the younger children instead of leaving? How can we make our elders understand that it needs to?
Well, you'll never make them understand. That's the problem. But you still need to talk about it. You need to deal with the problem. And the only way you can deal with the problem is to talk about it. And to allow the, whatever groups you've got coming in, trying to help, to do whatever they need to do. That's all you can do.
And that's what I said the last time I was meeting with these elders and medicine people. I said, we need to start talking about this. We need to help our young men. They told me I'm crazy. You're crazy to say that. These things are. If you come to my Hogan, then I'll tell you about it, and then I'll do what I can to help. But to help in the community, in a public place, or to educate in a classroom setting, they're against. Yeah,
I know. Okay. But we see this all everywhere. I mean, we see this everywhere. We see people with problems that they won't acknowledge. And the only way that they can cure those problems is to acknowledge them. If you're a drunk, and you don't think you're a drunk, you're going to be a drunk until you acknowledge the fact that I drink too much, and when I drink I get stupid, when I do stupid, then I do stupid things. And what I need to do is stop being stupid and stop drinking. So then we have to find out why you started drinking, and probably, who knows why you started drinking, but there's a reason why you continue to drink. Okay, anyway. So we have this problem. If you go to Germany, their beer is like 3 times stronger than ours is. They drink a lot more of it than we do in the United States. But they have fewer alcoholics in Germany than we do in the United States. Why is that?
Because they don't admit they're alcoholics.
Exactly. Their criteria for alcoholism is much higher than it is in the United States. You have to be somebody who urinates on yourself and doesn't go home at night and sleeps indoors in order to be an alcoholic. But in the United States, of course, we acknowledge people that don't urinate on themselves. Okay, so this is a problem all over the world. And potentially it's a problem here. And I'm not trying to pick on you guys. This is, the Germans have, everybody has the same problem. There are things that we don't want to talk about. And for that reason, of course, the East Asians will not admit that they have anxiety, they have social anxiety disorder. They just won't admit it. They make it into other things. In China, I was just reading this. In China, instead of being depressed, your depression manifests itself in a hypochondriacal structure. In other words, it has a somatic function. So if you're depressed, you may get a backache, or you may get chronic headaches, or something else. Nobody's ever depressed because they don't have any depression there. I was reading a book this weekend. Of course, I told my earlier class, I was reading a book this weekend, and it was about a murderer. And this guy was murdering little children in Soviet Russia. But they couldn't admit that he was murdering kids because, first of all, murder doesn't happen in Soviet Russia. And second of all, there are no sex crimes in Russia. So here we have this guy raping and murdering children. And he was able to get away with, he murdered 44 people, 44 children, males and females both. But they couldn't admit it because it doesn't exist in Soviet Russia. The problem was, if you were a cop and you saw all of these kids being murdered and he was doing odd things to them. He was tying a string around their ankle and he was cutting their stomachs out. And he did a good job. He was like a surgeon. He cut their stomachs out. And of course he killed them first. But, so the police that noticed this and saw a pattern, and when they brought it up to their superiors, they were executed. Of course they were. They were trying to say that the Soviet government didn't do something correctly. And you couldn't say that. So they were executed. So the police were afraid to deal with this. And he was able to murder 44 kids. And he murdered them along a railroad line. And nobody would admit it until they had one policeman who was who was kicked out of the police force, and he was made, he was put in the army, the militia, and part of their job was investigation. And he started investigating. He found all of these kids, and because he had lost his job as a policeman, he was able to say something. And then they started. They chased him. He was on the run, and he found the guy that did it, and he shot him and killed him. He and his wife did, because he murdered 44 children. And this is a true story. That's
Citizen X? Citizen X?
no, it's Child 44 is the name of the story.
There's one similar to that. I think they made into a movie. It's called Citizen X. Same method. The train they're using.
Yeah.
Kids are going back on the trains and
Yeah.
they come out. And, on those trains, they have like all these wooded areas.
Right. Well, maybe it was. It was probably the same individual, a different story.
Yeah.
In this one, he was killed by his brother. He was killing children so that his brother would acknowledge that he was alive, because they got separated during World War II. Yeah. Anyway, he butchered these kids, stripped them naked, raped them, stripped them naked, cut their stomachs out. And they just let it happen. This is so tragic. Okay, it has been documented universally, but counterintuitively, it is less documented in East Asian countries than in North American countries, despite greater concerns about social harmony and maintaining faith in East Asia. One of the things that you need to remember, if you ever go to that portion of the world, if you go to Asia, the Koreans' face is very important, the Japanese face is very important, the Chinese face is very important. So the idea is that I maintain a status, and that's what they refer to as face. My status is more important to me than anything, and I can't lose my status. So I have to act as if I have a select status. So if I were a professor who worried about these things, I would never joke with you guys. I would never swear. I'd never tell you what I really think. I would keep all that to myself, because otherwise I might lose face as far as you were concerned. You might not respect me as a professor. The respect you give me would be the most important thing to me, if I were that kind of a guy. But I'm obviously not, since I can't tell time. But just get all your stuff in by the 7th of December, and I'll be happy. I can go home, take my dogs with me. Okay. In general, though, the rates of social anxiety disorder in North America and Europe are 14 times higher than in East Asia, despite the fact that obviously these individuals suffer from it far more than we do. And of course, the problem is that they can't admit it. They won't admit it. They don't have that capability. The paradox between East Asians experiencing more symptoms but not meeting clinical criteria for social anxiety disorder may be due to differences in what behaviors are considered culturally normative. In Western cultures, the norm is for people to be extroverted. In East Asian cultures, the norm is for people to be more introverted. So since they are more introverted, this is a more common attribute. They did a study where they were looking at Canadian children and they were looking at Chinese children. And what they discovered was that Canadian children are expected to be aggressive. And if they're not aggressive, then their parents think there's something wrong with them. In China, if a child is aggressive, well, he's not. What am I talking about? If a child is very bashful, they consider that child worth more than a child that is just less, just interacts with all the other children. So bashfulness is an attribute that they're looking for, or they consider it an attribute. However, if you were a bashful Canadian, your parents would think there was something wrong with you. And they may take you to a psychiatrist to determine what was wrong and why you were so bashful. So they try to put you in things that would make you less bashful, make you more extroverted, because that's the norm there. That's what they want out of their children. If you think of all the children that you know, or all the kids that you went to high school with, or grade school with, who were the children that were the most picked on? It was the bashful ones, of course it was. In Canada, it's worse. I know, we think of Canadians as exactly like us, but it ain't true, they ain't the same. In Canada, they don't just want to win, they want to destroy the other team. I saw it over and over and over again. And I told this story to Sarah, she got upset. When I was playing softball against the Canadian team, and of course, I played on the native team, so we were up there, and we were kicking butt. And I used to run really, really fast. So at one point, the guy hit a single. I was standing on first base, and I scored from first base. And the guy hit a single to left field. And I scored all the way from first base. And so then I pinch ran for another guy. And when I did that, I did exactly the same thing. I scored from first base on a single. This was a single to center field. But I shouldn't have done. I mean, a normal person wouldn't have been able to score. I used to run really fast. Okay. So that was the deal. So the next time I came up to bat, I hit a ball to the shortstop, and I was running to first base, and the first baseman tripped me. And I busted my meniscus. I messed up my meniscus. I know, it took me out of the game. We lost that game, even though we were ahead by like 7 or 8 runs. As soon as they got me out of the game, they won. I know. So did the guy come up to me and say, "Geez, man, I'm sorry. I didn't really mean to get in your way." Is that what he did? No. Well, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to take me out of the game. As weird as that is. So we buckled my meniscus. They had 3 other tears in my meniscus. Found out that my ACL was gone. I know. And this guy, he did it on purpose. If you've ever played softball, there's 2 bases, right? There's the base that the guy touches, and then there's the base that you run to. The base that you run to is on the outside. And he slid all the way over both bases with his leg, trying to find the base. I was safe, but I was out. So it's not like he stuck out his leg and tripped me. What he did, he slid all the way across both of those bases and tripped me. He didn't have his foot on the base at all. They should have thrown him out of the game. Then the Canadians won, and they thought it was fine. Blood? What's blood? Not important. Okay, so anyway, Canadians ain't the same as Americans, okay? They're very competitive. They're extremely competitive. They're goons, all right? If you know anything about hockey. All the goons come from Canada. They really do. We don't have American goons. They're always from Canada. That's on the tape. Sarah's probably going to listen to this and fire my ass. That's not to say that social anxieties do not become a problem in East Asian cultures. There is a culture-bound disorder called Taijin Kaiyufushu, or a fear of confronting others. Now, if we had that same fear in the United States, which we really don't, and we don't even, this is a name for something we don't even know exists. It's a fear that is solicited by social situations such that one is concerned about how uncomfortable one makes other people feel, perhaps because of their gaze, their body odor, or their sweating. Do you worry about the fact that you stink so bad that somebody else is going to be offended by you? Do you worry that you're sweating so much and that your body is stinking so much, or that you're looking at somebody and it makes them feel uncomfortable? Can you imagine having this fear? Well, when you're sitting on an airplane sometimes you're going, "Oh man, I wish I put on more deodorant or something." I wish the guy next to me put on more deodorant. Well, we don't really do this in the United States. We don't have this fear. But they do in Asia. Now here's the weird part. They don't have a whole lot of body odor. I told you about the story of the stewardesses. There's a lot of aspects to that story. These stewardesses had been sprinting around the airplane for 18 hours, and here they got off the plane, they got onto the train, and they were all around me. So I should have been able to smell stinky Japanese stewardesses. I didn't smell anything. They don't put off pheromones, and their body, they don't have body odor. I couldn't smell anything. That's the reason I didn't react to them, because they didn't smell like anything. They don't have a very strong smell. The people that smell the strongest are Europeans. You don't have to tell me that. I've been told that many times. I know we smell like onions. I've been told that many times. You guys don't eat onions? Why don't you eat onions? You'd smell stronger. Travis eats onions.
So shouldn't they not have? They shouldn't have this disorder if they don't.
They don't smell like onions.
Maybe they feel uncomfortable for other people.
Maybe they smell other people, I would assume it's them.
Oh, that's a possibility. So they'd have to be
But
around.
they have to be around other people.
They have to be around Gaijin, right? They have to be around people that have an odor, not other Japanese, because they don't have a smell unless they get like drinking for like a week. Then they get a little bit of, they start smelling a little bit of acidic, a little bit of acerbic. It's really kind of interesting. But no, they don't smell hardly at all. I worked in the hospital over there, and I get these guys that have been there for like a week. Man, you put a white guy laying in a bed, sweating in a bed for a week. Boy, there's an odor for you. But these guys have nothing. I mean, they don't smell at all. But yet they have that problem. As curious as that is, it's not just in East Asia. It's also in Korea. But the Koreans eat a lot of kimchi. Kimchi has garlic in it, and it comes out of their pores. So they smell like garlic. They really do smell like garlic. But they all smell like garlic. I mean, if you're all around that grease, that burned grease at the gas station, then everybody's going to smell like that burned grease from the gas station. That's just the way it works. It's limited to Japan, China, and South Korea, not North Korea, because the North Koreans, of course, we're not exactly sure what's going on with the North Koreans. Suicide rates vary dramatically around the world. Eastern Europeans tend to have the highest rates. So Hungary, Bulgaria, those places have the highest rates. Russia has one of the highest suicide rates in the world. Muslim nations have the lowest. It is against their religion to commit suicide, so you hardly ever see it in Muslim countries. Suicide rates also vary depending on one's age, with the elderly generally being more likely to commit suicide in most cultures. And it's probably the same in your culture, I would guess. The older people are the ones, they find out that they've got Lou Gehrig's disease and they commit suicide. Oh, SpongeBob SquarePants, the guy that wrote, he died at 57. They diagnosed him with ALS last year. So this is kind of quick for ALS to knock somebody off. I'm betting he committed suicide. He's only 57 years old. Yeah, ALS doesn't kill you in a year. It takes you a while to go. So I'm betting he committed suicide. But nobody's saying anything.
There have been like assisted suicide, isn't it?
They do have assisted suicide, but I don't know if he's in a state that has assisted suicide. California has it, Oregon has it. I'm not sure where he lives. He's only 57. I'm betting we're going to find out he committed suicide. There is a special case in Micronesia in which there is a spike in adolescent age group. This started primarily in the 1970s when a spate of suicides occurred among adolescent men over a seemingly trivial problem with no obvious psychological issues to begin with. Why do young men commit suicide? Why do they commit suicide? I know, romance, breakup, like there's only one fish in the sea, right? Have you ever been fishing, you caught the one fish and had to quit? That's what your marriage is all about. You caught the one fish. Congratulations. Let me tell you, I've been married 3 times. There's 2 better fish out there. And sometimes they're better looking fish.
No,
I can't hear you, I can't hear you. La 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 la. Okay.
I don't know the culture.
What?
Culture.
There's only one fish?
There has to be only one fish.
Is that right?
My family is like
So what if your fish,
so
what if you lose, what if your fish swims away?
then I'm shit out of luck.
You don't get to marry somebody else?
Mhm.
Oh, man. Wow, that's rough.
Yep.
Has anybody else had more than one fish besides me? Am I the only one that's had more than one fish? You've only been married once, Edison? Just one time? Wow. I know you've only been married once. You've been married more than once? You're not married now?
Not married now, just trading off fishes and. This is it.
You know, I don't really like fish. I can't eat fish. I've got a disease that won't let me eat fish. But then, okay, well, we don't really. Okay. Sounds like I don't like women. Some have suggested that this spike was due to westernization. Okay, so what happened? These suicides were restricted to specific islands, particularly in the suburban regions of these islands. So it was the places where a lot of people lived. And it was in the, not the rural region, but the suburban region. Some have suggested that this spike was due to westernization of the island, leading to a loss of traditional roles for young men. Can you identify with that? So you lost your traditions, therefore they started committing suicide. This is Micronesia, of course. And this is what it looks like. So these young men between the age of 14 and 24, you can see the spike was huge. Everybody else about the same as all around the world. And here we have Egypt. Look at Egypt. Look at that. None. It's a Muslim country. So should we all convert so we can get rid of our suicides? Just a thought.
No.
No? Okay. Well. Of course not. That would be silly. Wait a minute.
Wait,
You want to say?
where's Micronesia?
Micronesia is this.
No, I mean, like, where's it at?
Oh, where is it? I'm sorry. Micronesia is the South Pacific over toward Indonesia. That's Micronesia. So New Guinea is Micronesia. Okay. Good. Micronesia. Losing connection between one's cultural narrative and modern society, lack of cultural continuity, seems to put people at risk for suicide. And this is a hint and a warning that we have seen all over the world. When you lose your culture, if you don't adhere to your culture, then one of the problems that we see is suicide. And of course, nobody wants to see that. We don't want to see that. Many First Nation bands do not have a strong sense of cultural continuity due to westernization, colonization. And of course, Western colonization, their problem was a little bit different than it was in the United States. I mean, the Americans were bad enough. I'm not going to try to exonerate Americans for doing all the shitty things that they did to you guys. They put you in boarding schools, but there was a reason why they put you in boarding schools. I actually wrote a paper about this. Really kind of interesting. They were trying to save. What was the alternative is the question. What was the alternative to boarding schools? It started in 1873, 1875. What was the alternative? Yeah, what if they hadn't started putting people in boarding schools? What would have happened?
Probably slaughtered us.
Slaughter. Yeah, the slaughter, that would be very brutal. Genocide was happening all over the place. They were massacring the Cheyenne up in Colorado. I'm sorry?
Because they were refusing to go.
Right, yeah, well, sure, they didn't want to go onto the reservations. And it was all over the place. They were having problems with the Apache, south of here. They were having problems with the Sioux. Having a lot of problems with a lot of different groups. They had one group that was relatively peaceful that didn't want to go on the reservation, so they tried to go up into Canada. They wouldn't even let them go, the Nez Perce, from Oregon. And they made their way all the way through Montana. And they were stopped on the Fort Belknap Reservation, as interesting as that is. And so you may ask yourself, well, why didn't the Fort Belknap Indians help them? There's a bunch of them right there. Why didn't they help them?
I have a question, Bruce. When it comes to social anxiety, like
Right.
something dealing with suicide and
Sure.
I call it being caught in between two societies.
Makes sense.
Western society, or here on the Navajo reservation
Right.
would be the Navajo society.
Right.
So not being accepted to. I have a younger brother that's at the store probably right now, and he refuses to be. He denies his culture.
He denies his Navajo.
His Navajo culture, and then also the Western society. So he's on the streets, and he doesn't believe that his culture is real, or the society. So now he's just living day by day and
Wow.
being caught in between two worlds.
My goodness gracious.
So I'm thinking like,
No, he's not being caught between two worlds because he won't accept either one.
so,
Right.
Yeah. So what world is he living in? That's what I'm trying to figure.
Like,
Well, the question is, so what does he do? Does he play video games? Does he watch television? Does he watch Netflix?
No, he goes to the store like every day. So every day he's over there and
That's it?
he stands there and
What clothes does he wear?
he wears the same clothes almost every day. So he tries.
Clothes like what you have on right now?
No,
No.
like the clothes that they give out at the church.
Sounds to me like he's part of the counterculture. So he doesn't accept the Western ideals, and he also doesn't accept the Navajo ideals. What's going to eventually happen to him?
You mentioned that he attempted like twice.
Oh, he's attempted suicide twice. How old is he?
About 34.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
So I did a paper on that, being caught in between two worlds.
Yeah, it's very real.
And I'm wondering if that's, it's a lot of contributing factors that even historical trauma. I try to figure out what historical trauma is. Is it being caught there? Is that the one that causes that historical trauma?
No. Historical trauma is more like you guys talking about the long walk over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's historical trauma. So you suffer what they suffer. That's historical trauma, and it's very real because you can identify with the people that walked to Fort Sumner.
Okay.
Right?
I got another one.
Maybe something like free will, doing this, his own free will.
Who his brother?
Because in reality, we got people that are out there on the streets being homeless, and some of them are indigenous peoples that are actually living off the reservation, and they choose to go to like urban places, and they have this mentality as to where I don't live above the
Right.
system or below the system. I'm equal with everything.
Well, they're
Nature.
rejecting-
Yeah.
they're rejecting everything.
Exactly. Could that be something that might be?
You could call it free will if you want, but free will sounds like it sounds too positive to me. Because this is more nihilism. This is more a rejection of everything, a rejection of anything that's positive. I mean, it doesn't work, right? Does he panhandle? Is that how he survives?
I think yeah,
Probably.
probably, yeah,
Okay.
just to get by.
Okay. Okay.
So I tried figuring him out. I did some ceremonies for him. And the one thing that he's mentioned is that, you know, he says, I'm happy. And it's my life. And if you think it's not normal to live the way I do,
There's a
maybe
problem.
there's a problem with you.
Well,
You're
with
not
you.
normal. I'm happy.
What tells us that he's not happy?
The way he dresses, where he's at,
I'm guessing it's a suicide
the
attempt.
suicide attempt.
Happy people don't try to commit suicide.
Maybe it's just a cover-up,
What, the suicide?
you know, the
No, it's just
happiness.
saying that
the
he's
Oh,
fake
saying that
happiness.
he's happy, yeah, it's just a word as far as he's concerned. Yeah. Yeah, that's nihilism. It's the philosophy of negativity. It's a philosophy of death, in essence.
When you go to bashes now today, like generally they're getting younger like every year.
Oh, is that right?
Like right out of high school, you see a lot of younger people over.
But we see this with young people.
So you try. What I'm trying to figure out is that, you know, what are contributing factors to it? Is it being caught between two societies? What is it that affects, you know, their mentality? What makes them do what they're doing and not accept both?
We see rejection, and we see people that reject society, and that's okay as long as they accept something. They become I don't know, skateboard guys with shorts and shoes and skateboards. You know, they need to identify with something. Everybody needs to identify with something. And individuals that can't identify with anything are. Yeah, he thinks so. But I mean, he's tried to commit suicide twice. Yeah, this is kind of a serious problem, isn't it? If you think about it, people that drink a lot of alcohol or take a lot of drugs are in the same boat because they're in it's like they're in between two worlds. You know, a world where everybody else lives, or you know, whatever is up there, but they're between those two worlds. And they just live in their nihilistic mindset. I know that sounds really negative, but it's a negative situation. Okay, so yeah, they see this up north. They see there's a lot of suicides up north on the Indian reservations. There's something else happening up there that seems to be coming down here that people have started talking about. Human trafficking is very common up on the reservations, or I'm sorry, the reserves up in Canada. 50% of all the people that are trafficked come from the reserves, even though they don't represent very much of the population. But 50% of the prostitutes in Canada. But we see our First Nation people. Now, we see this wherever we have English, wherever the English took over a country. Australia, we see the same thing with the Aborigines in Australia. We see the same thing in Canada. We see the same thing in South Africa. We see the same thing in former Kenya. Wherever the English are, we see this using indigenous people as second-class citizens. I know everybody loves the Canadians, and as well you should love the Canadians, but they do have problems. The other problem that they have in Canada is they have a lot more spousal abuse. So there's a lot more domestic violence in Canada than there is in the United States. Now, we have our problems in the United States. I'm not saying we don't, but the Canadians have more. And they also have more traffic. So, and they use indigenous peoples as their targets. As sad as that is, people from Montana, I lived right there on the border. They would tell stories about going up into Canada, and you couldn't trust the police. You couldn't trust the Mounties because if they got you in jail, they'd rape you. And so, I mean, it was all these horrible, horrible stories about the people up there. I know it's a little bit different. I guess they're a little bit grouchier up there. No, they're not. They're polite. They're the most polite people in the world. Anyway, okay. Support, what time is that? It's almost time. Support for this argument has come from findings that bans from stable connections to traditional cultural past have lower suicide rates. Such a connection is indicated by negotiating a land claim with the government, possessing self-government, maintaining control over educational services, controlling their police and fire departments, managing health services and cultural facilities. So the point is that the more you can control your own, the more autonomy that you have, the less likely that we'll see suicide on the reservation. And the reservations that are more splintered, like the Apache reservations, we see a lot more suicide. Suicide rates on the Apache reservations are twice what it is anyplace else. As weird as that is. They have the highest suicide rates in the United States, of any group in the United States. Now, they speak the same damn language you guys do, so what in the hell is the difference between them guys and you guys?
I think they're more conformed to like Christianity and like churches. That
Oh
type of-
God, you're not going to blame it on the church.
I think I'm blaming it on the church. I'm just saying they believe. It seems to me that they believe.
You know, I don't know. I have no idea. I'm so shocked that I can't get anybody to even say the word Apache on this reservation. What the hell's going on? And I've asked this question.
You're talking about church, and I've known I don't know who's well, I'll just call him a bishop. Yeah, we talked about suicide, and he confessed that he always thinks about suicide, and he was just talking about suicide. How will I do it? Stuff like that.
Right.
Can I stand on a chair? Will I just walk in front of the people? Will I just jump off? All these things are going through his head, and it's just like, I guess that's the problem, just thinking about it. And his wife just turned away and just looked at him. He just spilled like that with beans on it. And I never thought anybody with a strong background or religion would even think of something like that.
It's a viable option. It's a viable option for him, and that's why he talks about it. That's why he thinks about it like that. Okay. So do you guys have an answer for me as far as the Apache are concerned?
I lived there a lot. I mean, I lived there.
Haven't I asked you about the Apache before?
No.
Okay.
But I was going to say that it's probably just like you said, you got to do the research on it.
Okay.
You got to be able to gather